Do not go into the tomb of Menenhedet I, he said. He should have terrified me, but did not. I could not understand why. If he had failed to retreat, and I had been obliged to drive him away, it might have been worse than plunging my fist into a thigh and gone on gangrene. He was a pale of repulsion into which you did not dare advance, yet he was afraid of me. He would not approach any closer. All the same, I had hardly escaped without cost. His words had entered my head with his reek. I did not know what he meant. Had Menenhedet I also been moved into this cheap tomb bought for Menenhedet II? What was that? Was that a new event? Or was I in the wrong street? But if my memory had a foundation, this was the narrow alley to which the mourners had marched on that high sun-filled day, when the prize white oxen, with their horns gilded gold and their white flanks decorated in green and scarlet pink, had pulled the golden sledge of Mene II to his last appalling home. Was this ghost attempting to mislead me? Do not enter the tomb of Menenhedet I, he intoned again. Too much disturbance will result. That he, this invader of graves, was now ready to warn others made me laugh. In the moonlight, my merriment must, however, have stirred in the shadows, for the ghost recoiled. There is more I can tell you, he blurted out, but I cannot bear your stench. And he was gone. The subtlest punishment he had suffered was to think his own odor had come from others. So he would go blundering through every encounter. Now, right on his disappearance, I saw the Ba of Mene II. It appeared at the window. The Ba was not even the size of a hawk, and its face was as small as a newborn child. Yet it was Mene's face. The most handsome I had ever seen on a man, now reduced, his features were exquisite. His features were exquisite, as if an infant had been born with the intelligence of a full-grown adult. What a face! If it now gazed on me, it looked away immediately. Then the Ba of Menenhedet II opened its wings, and with a doleful sound, ugly as a crow in its loud funs of pessimism, cawed once, cawed twice, and flew away. Depressed by such indifference to me, I moved to the door of the tomb. As I stood in the portal, I was drenched in the most sudden and lamentable sorrow, huge and simple-minded, as though his own grief came to me from my dead friend Mene. I sighed. My last memory of this place was the slattern appearance of the entrance, and that had not changed. I remember thinking it would be easy to violate, and once again I felt that sense of accommodation, which allowed me earlier in this night to pass out of the narrow shaft of Khufu's chamber. Now my finger flowed, or so had felt, into the grooves of the wooden keyhole. When I turned my hand, the prong rose, and with it, the bolt. I stepped into the tomb. It made me aware of my skin, as if a fingernail had touched my scalp. A cat's tongue could have been scraping the soles of my feet. They tingled. I had a frightful sense of disorder and stink. The moon was shining through the open door, and by that light I could see that any offerings of food which had been left so were long ago gorged by robbers. Valuables were broken or gone. The thieves' passion to besmirch was evident all over the place. What an outpouring of the coffers of the gut! Full payment. I was in a fury. The slovenliness of the caretakers. In that instant, my eye saw a charred stick in a bronze sconce on the wall, and on the full rise of my rage, I glared at it so fiercely that I was hardly surprised when smoke unfolded. The charcoal at the tip began to gleam, and the torch was lit. I had heard of priests who would consecrate their wrath enough to start a fire by the light of their eye, but I rarely believed such tales. Now it seemed, if anything, more natural than striking sparks on dried wood. What a waste! Floods of future chaos lived in the discontents of these unruly thieves. Beware of those who live at the bottom of the kingdom. They had smashed as much as they had stolen. It obliged me to think of how exquisite Mindy's apartment had been in the last years of his life, and on the instant I could recall Hathvertiti sobbing, even as she tried to consult me on which of his alabaster vases and collar plates, his bracelets and jeweled girdles were to be buried with him. Should she enter his long box of ebony or his chest of redwood, his blonde wig, his white wig, his red, his green, his silver, or his black wig, his cosmetic case, his linen loincloths, his full linen skirts, even his ebony bed, which I knew she was desperate to keep for herself, and did. Then how to choose among the weapons, the gilt bow and the gold-painted arrows, the spear with the jewels in the shaft. Were all these delightful items to accompany him to the tomb? In the middle of such reveries, she would cry out, "Poor Minnie," and added pious lamentations that would have sounded absurd in any voice less deep than her own. "The fruit of my eye has been eaten," she would scream at the white walls and the serene wing of their villa. His superb wing, his eye for the finest works, she could afford never more evident than by his absence. And she, a picture, debauched by her sense of loss, her heart twisted by the obligation to bury so many of these jeweled prizes and golden beauties. She wept over his baby chair, a masterpiece of bronze, with gold foil laid in, wept so long as she kept it. Even his knives, his palette box and brushes, she could hardly bear to entomb, while his axe blade, a treasure from the reign of Thutmose III, with hollow grill work within the blade to depict a wild dog eating a gazelle from behind. Well, Hathvartiti's nose began to bleed before she could recognize that this, having been a gift to her son, could not be taken back. Of course, this enabled her to keep her other objects, particularly his crown of feathers, his leopard skin, and his scarab of green onyx, with all 6 of the beetle's legs in gold. Be certain that whichever parts of Minnie's collection were finally sent to the tomb turned out to be the true ratio between Hathvertiti's greed, 8 parts, and Hathvertiti's belief in the power of an afterworld, 5 parts. But then she would never allow herself to succumb altogether to greed. That could leave a hole through which demons would pour. Once she had even given me a lecture on Ma'at, M-A-A-T, predictably the most pious sermon you could receive, for Ma'at was right thinking and never cheated one's neighbor. Ma'at was the virtue of balance. Yes, Hathvertides, in the midst of the roaring waters of her greed, could still speak respectfully of Ma'at. Without it, what is there she would not have kept for herself? Yet with a torch in my hand, I would never accuse Hathvertiti of any excess of right thinking. Witness the scatter on the floor. At the least, she had given a welcome to robbers who had no sense of Ma'at at all. Their urine was on the food, and do not speak of what was caked on the gold plates they left behind. The next room proved worse. The burial chamber had not even been dug beneath. It was merely a continuation of this room. There was no more for partition than a wall of mud brick, cheap. There was no barrier to passing from the official offering chamber right into the burial chamber. Still, I hesitated. I did not want to go in. The air was different as I crossed the second threshold. There was the faintest suggestion of an odor so fearful I came to a stop. My torch was not steady and shook with twice the upheaval I expected. Of course, not 1 sarcophagus, but 2, both smashed. The outer coffins had their covers thrown into a corner. The lid of each coffin was also torn off, and the mummy cases, now exposed, revealed the thefts. Wherever a gem had been plucked, the high patina of the surface was marred with a small crater of plaster. All the collars and amulets were gone, of course, and the painted face and chest of many, the portrait, as beautiful as he had once been beautiful, was scarred. 3 vertical slashes distorted the nose. Common thread there. Some crude attempt had been made to knife through the wrappings on his chest. Such damage was small compared to the feet. The robbers had started to undo the windings there. A hopeless tatter of linen wrappings covered the floor, some in bandages of endless length, others in squares and scraps, a litter underfoot. An animal might have been collecting materials for a nest, even the bones of a chicken. The robbers had eaten in here. If my nose was true, they had not dared to defecate. They had not dared to defecate as well, not in here with the wrapped bodies. Still, the origin of that faint but unsettling odor was clear. One of the exposed feet was beginning to molder. In a corner, the other sarcophagus was equally disturbed. It could belong only to Menenhetet I. He had been moved here by Hathfertiti. In time to be violated. My legs, however, were not about to take me in his direction. No, I did not dare go near the mummy of the great-grandfather. Near to me, however, was Meni, his feet uncovered and his tomb despoiled. The food for his ka had been gobbled by the thieves. That infuriated me. I could see his aura well, and its 3 bands of light were of a pale violet hue, as near to invisible as 3 ridges of hills behind one another on a misty evening. I did not like to look at it. There was every message to be read in the color of an aura. Hathfertiti, in a rage, had an unmistakable separation of orange, blood red, and brown, whereas the former pharaoh, they said, had an aura of pure white, pure silver, and gold. This pale violet light about my friend's wrapped body spoke, however, of exhaustion, as if what little was left of him might be trying to maintain some calm among the many horrors. Be it said, the first of these had to be the presence of other sarcophaguses. At the thought of looking at the great-grandfather's remains, I put my torch down in confusion. Immediately it went out. I had a sense of how much strength must be used by many merely to withstand the presence of the other. Yet now the suppression seemed to ease. I did not know if it was due to my effort. Suddenly I felt very tired. But in any case, Meni's aura brightened. The air eased. I felt an impulse to study what was left of his poor foot. That was the worst choice I could have made. In the hole at the toe was a feast of worms. In those pullulations, who could know how much of his foot was gone? The aura was absent here. Near the toes, no glow was left but for the faint, pale green light that rose from the body of the maggots themselves. Then as I watched, the aura swelled again. I saw a snake crawl into the doorway of the burial chamber. Seizing the torch, I struck one overhead blow at its head. Then another, and caught it. The body whipped in a final dance. Right after the last quiver, my torch began to burn. Nor did I hesitate to carry the light back with me. I had an impulse to look again at the worms. But studying the cavity of Meni's foot, that white and feeding mill, I was suddenly aware of a bruise on the ball of my own foot. To what length must friendship be pursued that I must now limp in company with my old companion? A detestation rose in me against the corruption of his body. I was ready to put my torch to the hole in his foot, fry his worms, seal the putrefying flesh. In fact, I started to do so, but I drew back from the fear that I might suffer a scorched foot myself. Now I was hungry, suddenly and maniacally hungry. I clamped my jaws against the beginning of his prodigious desire, for it would have had me sniffing like a dog at the canopic jars beside the coffin. Those 4 jars of the sons of Horus, each the size of a fat cat, with the carved head of Het, the ape. had carefully wrapped small intestines of the dead man, and the jar watched over by Tuamutef, the jackal, could offer the same for the heart and lungs, while Amzit, with the head of a man, now owned the liver and the gallbladder. With Amzit now owned the stomach and large intestines, and even as Queb-Hesnef, the hawk, carried the liver and the gallbladder. To my horror, thoughts of a broth to be boiled out of these preserved organs would not leave my head, no matter how I drew back from so hideous a temptation. On the other hand, I had to satisfy my hunger. I could hardly leave the tomb, cross the necropolis, walk all the way to the Nile, and find a food shop with a fire and some old witch to feed me. No, not at this hour. Food had to be found here. Near to panic from the onslaught of such obscene desires, I found myself on my knees, and I was praying. The wonder was that I remembered. But oh, these worms in the unwrapped and swarming hole of the foot, they provided the prayer. When the soul has departed, I said softly, the light from my torch casting shadows on the ceiling. When the soul has departed, I said softly, the light from my torch casting shadows on the ceiling. A man sees corruption. He becomes a brother to decay, and he sinks into a myriad of worms. He becomes nothing but worms. Homage to thee, divine Father Osiris. Thou did not wither, thou did not rot, thou did not turn into worms. So will my members have been everlasting. I shall not decay, I shall not rot, I shall not putrefy, and I shall not see corruption. My eyes were closed. I looked within myself, deep into the darkness of the blackest earth I had ever seen. Black is the land of Kemt, our Egypt. In that blackness, I heard my words reverberate. Inside of the blackness, inside of him, he heard his words reverberate, as in the tolling of a large bell at the tithe taker's gate below Memphis. And knew these words had a buoyancy greater than the ascension of prayers on odors of incense. The echo reverberating in the closed darkness of my eyes, I could contain my hunger no longer, and held up my arms with all 5 fingers extended, as if to say, with these 5 fingers I would eat, and turn in a circle, committing myself to gods or demons I did not know. In reply, 5 scorpions came out in a file of the hawk-faced jar of Queb-Hesnef, god of the west, the liver and the gallbladder, and crossed the floor from the bier, B-I-E-R, of Menenhetet I up to the hole in the wrappings of Menenhetet II. There they began, I assume, for I was not ready to look, to devour the worms. Did they go on to the flesh of 2? I do not know. But my sore foot burned with the fiery spice of a nest of 2 ants. Wow, that's a great one. So our hero seems to have found himself in a pretty dark spot. I don't know if he walked to the graveyard or if he just showed up there. But he found the tomb of his buddy, who was a bit of a blasphemous gent. They all were. So am I. So are you, hopefully. And went into his tomb. Before going into his tomb, he was warned by the soul of a grave robber. Don't go in there. Don't go into Menenhetet I's tomb. He's like, this ain't Menenhetet I's tomb. This is Menenhetet II's tomb, bro. It's my homie. Even though it took like 3 generations to make him a junior, Menenhetet II, the junior. His great-grandfather was Menenhetet. So he went in, and it seemed like there's 3 graves in there, but I think I misread that because he said that Menenhetet I was in the corner. He went in. Clearly, they'd been robbed, as was pretty common back in the day. It's cheaper. So they're 100 years past Ramses. I don't know any history. Pretty interesting. So they're sharing tombs because his wife or his mom, Hathfertiti, I don't remember. I think it was his mom. Sold Menenhetet I's tomb and put both Menenhetet I and II in this shitty old shit box where grave robbers had come in and like plucked jewels out of their fucking faces and shit. And in this moment where our hero is staring down all this stuff, he feels a kinship, a physical kinship with Menenhetet II. He looks at his foot, which has been unbound a little bit, and there's bugs in it, and now he feels that pain. And all of a sudden, he feels a deep hunger. He needs to eat, but he can't. He knows he can't make it anywhere. So he turns around. He plans not to eat. He says, "Osiris, dude, I am not gonna eat these old intestines. I swear." I think that's what happened. And then Osiris says, and then whatever. Then he turns around like he's gonna do it, and a bunch of scorpions come out of Menenhetet I's guts and crawl up to the foot, start eating the bugs out of it. I don't know if they're cleaning it for him to eat or what. Stay tuned. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. I gotta go to fucking work. Wait, we don't need this. Bad language on this one.